Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Missouri. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. In the autumn of 1890, when the leaves began to fall in Caldwell County, Missouri, the residents of the small settlement of Hamilton noticed something peculiar about the old Gresham house that stood on the edge of town, almost hidden behind a grove of ancient oak trees. For the first time in over a decade, light flickered behind the dusty windows of the second floor. The sisters had returned. Local records from the county historical archives indicate that the Gresham property, built in 1862, had remained virtually abandoned since the death of Judge Percival Gresham in 1879. The judge, a stern and respected figure in the county courthouse, had left behind 3 daughters, Edith, Margaret, and the youngest, Violet. According to property deeds uncovered during research for this documentary, the sisters had left Hamilton shortly after their father's burial, reportedly to live with relatives in St. Louis. What prompted their return 11 years later remained a mystery to the townspeople. The only official record found was a notice of estate settlement filed at the county courthouse on September 23, 1890. A yellowed newspaper clipping from the local newspaper dated September 25th briefly mentioned, "The Mrs. Gresham have returned to occupy their family home following resolution of estate matters long delayed by legal complications." The brevity of this announcement seemed peculiar for a town where newcomers, or in this case returning residents, typically warranted more substantial attention. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, whose grandmother had served as housekeeper for the Greshams until 1878, shared in a recorded interview conducted in 1932 that there was something immediately unsettling about the sisters' return. "My grandmother always said there was a heaviness that came back with those women," the recording states. Not just their trunks and belongings, but something that made the air around that house feel thick, like before a terrible storm. According to town records, the eldest sister, Edith, then 33 years of age, was the first to be seen in town, visiting the local bank to arrange financial matters. The manager's log noted her visit as brief and businesslike, though he remarked in his private journal that Miss Gresham appeared considerably aged beyond her years, with a pallor suggesting extended illness. This journal, discovered in 1957 during the renovation of the old bank building, provides one of the few contemporary descriptions of any of the sisters. Margaret, the middle sister, was rarely observed leaving the property, though delivery records from the general store indicated regular orders of supplies beginning in October of 1890. The youngest sister, Violet, who would have been 25 at the time of their return, was not mentioned in any public records or accounts for the first 3 months after their arrival. This absence sparked quiet speculation among the more gossiping elements of Hamilton society. The Gresham property itself was substantial by local standards, a 3-story brick residence set back from the main road surrounded by nearly 8 acres of once cultivated land that had since grown wild. County tax records describe the main house as having 14 rooms, unusual for the region, as well as a separate carriage house and what was referred to as a garden cottage located at the far edge of the property, almost entirely obscured by tall hedgerows planted during Judge Gresham's time. The most striking feature of the estate, according to architectural surveys conducted in 1927, was the unusually designed 3rd floor, which contained only a single room spanning the entire width of the house, with windows on all 4 sides. Local lore referred to this as the Judge's Observatory, though its true purpose remained unclear. What became evident in later investigations was that this room would play a significant role in the disturbing events that followed. Winter came early to Missouri that year, with the first snow falling before Thanksgiving. The townsfolk noted that smoke rose constantly from both chimneys of the Gresham house throughout the cold months. A delivery boy from the general store quoted in an oral history collection compiled in 1912, recalled that the interior of the house felt unnaturally warm, like walking into a fever, when he brought supplies to the kitchen door. Dr. James Holbrook, the town physician, recorded in his patient log a visit to the Gresham house on December 12, 1890. The entry, discovered among his effects after his death in 1917, simply states, "Called to Gresham residence, youngest sister, symptoms unclear, patient uncommunicative, prescribed bed rest and tonic." No further medical visits were documented that winter. As 1890 gave way to 1891, the people of Hamilton had largely grown accustomed to the quiet presence of the Gresham sisters. They maintained minimal contact with the community, attended no social functions, and were never seen at the local church. Their isolation might have continued unremarked upon had it not been for the events that began to unfold in the early spring of that year. The first indication that something was amiss came in the form of a letter sent by Edith Gresham to a lawyer in Jefferson City. This letter, preserved in the State Historical Society archives, requested urgent assistance regarding matters of inheritance requiring immediate attention. The lawyer, one Mr. Frederick Pemberton, noted his arrival in Hamilton on March 10, 1891. The register of the town's only boarding house confirms his 3-day stay. What transpired during Mr. Pemberton's visit to the Gresham house was not documented in any official capacity. However, the proprietress of the boarding house later claimed in an interview given to the local historical society that the lawyer appeared visibly shaken upon his return from the house on the second day. She quoted him as saying, "Some inheritances carry burdens no document can describe." Mr. Pemberton departed on the morning stage the following day, and, according to correspondence found in his office after his death in 1905, never returned to Hamilton. By mid-April, residents living nearest to the Gresham property began to report unusual sounds coming from the direction of the house, particularly during the night hours. Marshall Everett's log contains 3 separate entries regarding complaints of wailing or crying sounds originating from the Gresham estate. The final entry, dated April 23rd, indicates that upon investigation, he was assured by Miss Edith Gresham that the sounds were merely the settling of an old house long unoccupied, and that her younger sister was recovering from a nervous condition aggravated by the damp spring weather. Perhaps most telling was an exchange documented between Edith Gresham and the owner of the hardware store, recorded in his sales ledger. On April 27, 1891, Miss Gresham purchased an unusual quantity of items: 3 heavy padlocks, 200 feet of sturdy rope, a set of carpentry tools, and, most curiously, several large bolts of dark fabric described as suitable for heavy drapery. The storekeeper noted that Miss Gresham insisted on having these items delivered after nightfall, an unusual request that he reluctantly accommodated. The delivery man, a young man named Thomas Milligan, provided a disturbing account years later to his grandson, who recorded it in a family history compiled in 1948. According to this account, when Thomas arrived at the Gresham house shortly after 9 o'clock that evening, he observed lights moving behind the windows of the third-floor room. As he approached the front door with his delivery, the lights suddenly extinguished, and he heard what he described as a sound like furniture being dragged forcefully across the floor, followed by something heavy falling. When Edith Gresham answered his knock, she appeared disheveled, her typically immaculate hair falling loose around her shoulders. Most unsettling, according to Thomas's account, was that her hands bore fresh scratches, which she quickly concealed by pulling on gloves before accepting the delivered items. She paid him with a silver dollar, an overly generous tip that he later described as feeling like blood money in his palm. The month of May brought unseasonably warm weather to Missouri that year, and with it new developments at the Gresham house. Workers from the neighboring farm reported seeing the middle sister, Margaret, digging in the overgrown garden behind the house in the early morning hours. One worker described her as moving like someone in a waking dream, mechanical and slow. The excavation continued for nearly a week, resulting in what appeared to be a series of small pits arranged in a peculiar pattern. A letter from Margaret Gresham to a botanical supply company in St. Louis, preserved in their business records, requested an unusual variety of plants, all known for their dense foliage and rapid growth. The order was delivered in late May, and within weeks, the newly dug areas of the garden were filled with fast-growing shrubbery that soon obscured whatever might lie beneath. Throughout that summer, interaction between the Gresham sisters and the townspeople of Hamilton dwindled to near non-existence. The only regular contact came through a weekly delivery of groceries and supplies, left at the front gate rather than brought to the house as had been the previous arrangement. Payment was always left in an envelope, the exact amount in cash, with never a note or message enclosed. The third-floor room of the Gresham house became the subject of increasing curiosity and speculation. Farmers working in the distant fields reported seeing a figure standing at the windows for hours at a time, motionless, watching. Yet, whenever anyone approached the property, the figure would vanish. By July, those windows were covered with the dark, heavy fabric purchased months earlier, and no movement was visible from outside. In early August, a traveling photographer passing through Hamilton took what would become the only known image of the Gresham house during this period. The faded sepia photograph, now housed in the County Historical Museum, shows the imposing brick structure partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. A careful examination of the image, enhanced during restoration in 1968, reveals what appears to be a face visible at one of the third-floor windows, despite the heavy draperies known to have been installed months earlier. Experts remain divided on whether this is a genuine capture or merely an artifact of the photographic process. The most significant development came on August 17, 1891, when a fire broke out in the carriage house of the Gresham property. The town's volunteer fire brigade responded, but by the time they arrived, the structure was fully engulfed. According to their account, preserved in the fire brigade's incident log, Violet Gresham appeared briefly at an upstairs window of the main house, her face pressed against the glass, like someone desperate to escape. One of the brigade members described her as terribly thin, with eyes so hollow they appeared as dark smudges against her skin. When several men moved toward the house, concerned for her safety, Edith Gresham emerged from the front door and assured them that all occupants were accounted for and unharmed. As they fought to prevent the flames from spreading to the main house, 2 brigade members reported seeing the youngest sister, Violet, for the first time since the family's return. The carriage house burned to its foundation. Among the charred remains, according to the marshal's report, were several trunks and personal effects, apparently stored rather than in use, including what appeared to be women's clothing and correspondence. The cause of the fire was officially recorded as undetermined, though Marshal Everett noted his suspicion of deliberate setting in his private journal. In the weeks following the fire, residents of houses nearest to the Gresham property reported a new and troubling phenomenon, a distinct odor that seemed to emanate from the direction of the estate, particularly on warm days. Descriptions varied from sickeningly sweet to, like meat, gone to rot, but all agreed it was most noticeable when the wind blew from the east, where the garden cottage stood behind its screen of hedges. On September 3, 1891, Edith Gresham visited the office of Dr. Holbrook. Though no record exists of what transpired during this consultation, the physician was observed visiting the Gresham house later that same day, carrying his medical bag. He returned to his office after less than 30 minutes, according to witnesses, and immediately canceled his remaining appointments for the day. When questioned later by concerned citizens, Dr. Holbrook cited professional confidentiality and refused to discuss the matter. What happened next would forever alter the course of events at the Gresham house and cement its dark legacy in the annals of Missouri's most disturbing historical incidents. The stage was set for a revelation that would chill the blood of even the most rational minds. A secret hidden behind the heavy draperies of the third-floor room within the overgrown garden's fresh plantings, and perhaps most significantly, within the binding terms of an inheritance that should never have been accepted. The night of September 21st, 1891, exactly 1 year after the sisters' return to Hamilton, would mark the beginning of the end for the Gresham household. And as with many dark chapters in history, it began with a storm. Meteorological records from 1891 indicate that the storm, which descended upon Caldwell County that September night, was unusually severe for the season. Lightning struck with such frequency that several witnesses later described the sky as continuously illuminated, while the rain fell in sheets so dense that visibility was reduced to mere feet. It was against this backdrop of nature's fury that the next chapter in the Gresham sisters' story unfolded. Town constable records indicate that at approximately 11:30 that night, as the storm reached its peak intensity, a frantic pounding was heard at the door of Marshal Everett's residence. Upon answering, he discovered Margaret Gresham standing before him, drenched to the skin, her clothing torn and muddy. According to his official statement preserved in county records, she was in a state of extreme agitation, alternating between incoherent muttering and moments of unsettling clarity. The marshal's wife, who was present during this encounter, later provided a written account to the local historical society in which she described Margaret's appearance that night. Her hair hung in wet ropes around her face, which was scratched as if by brambles or perhaps fingernails. Most disturbing were her hands, the fingertips worn raw and bleeding, the nails broken to the quick. She clutched at my husband's arm with such force that her fingers left bruises that remained visible for days afterward. What Margaret Gresham said to Marshal Everett was not fully documented in official records. His initial report stated only that she made accusations of a serious nature regarding activities at the Gresham residence requiring immediate investigation. However, in personal papers discovered after his death in 1917, a more detailed account was found. According to these notes, Margaret spoke of a terrible arrangement that had been made by her elder sister, an arrangement that bound them all to something unspeakable. Marshal Everett, accompanied by Dr. Holbrook, whom he summoned immediately, proceeded to the Gresham house through the continuing storm. They brought Margaret with them, as she refused to be left behind, insisting that they would need her to find what had been hidden. The small party arrived at the house shortly after midnight, finding it dark save for a single light visible in the third-floor room. The front door stood ajar, swinging gently in the wind. Water pooled on the marble floor of the entrance hall, suggesting it had been open for some time during the downpour. According to Dr. Holbrook's subsequent statement, the interior of the house was oppressively silent despite the raging storm outside, creating an unnerving contrast that he described as like stepping into the eye of a hurricane. Margaret Gresham led the men through the main floor of the house, past rooms filled with furniture draped in white cloths, untouched since their return nearly a year earlier. She moved with purpose toward the back of the house, to a narrow door that opened onto a servant's staircase. This, she indicated, was how they accessed the third floor, as the main staircase had been sealed off at the second-floor landing. As they ascended the tight spiral of steps, Dr. Holbrook noted a distinct change in the atmosphere, the air becoming noticeably warmer and heavier with each step, permeated by an odor he described as medicinal, yet underlaid with something organic and decaying. Marshal Everett's account mentioned that Margaret paused several times during their climb, pressing her forehead against the wall as if gathering strength before continuing. What they discovered upon reaching the third floor has become the subject of much speculation and debate among historians and those who study unusual cases. The official report filed by Marshal Everett was remarkably sparse, stating only that they found evidence of unusual activities of a potentially concerning nature, and that the eldest, Miss Gresham, was not present, while the youngest was found in a state requiring medical attention. Dr. Holbrook's medical log, typically meticulous in detail, contains only a brief entry for that night. called to Gresham residence with Marshall Everett, condition of youngest sister beyond local medical capabilities. Recommended immediate transfer to State Hospital in St. Joseph. Nature of ailment defies conventional diagnosis. The entry is followed by a series of question marks, the only such notation in his otherwise precise records. It was not until 1928, in an interview given shortly before his death, that Dr. Holbrook provided a more complete account of what he witnessed in the third-floor room of the Gresham house. This testimony, recorded by a researcher from the State Historical Society, was sealed by request until 1950, by which time all principal parties involved were deceased. According to this account, the third-floor room had been transformed from its original purpose into what Dr. Holbrook could only describe as a chamber designed for confinement rather than comfort. The windows were not merely covered, but sealed with boards over which the heavy draperies had been hung. The only furniture was a bed positioned in the center of the room, with restraints attached to its frame, restraints that showed evidence of prolonged use. Most disturbing was the condition of Violet Gresham, found lying upon this bed. Dr. Holbrook's clinical description indicates she was severely malnourished, with musculature suggesting long-term immobility. Her wrists and ankles bore the marks of prolonged restraint, while her skin had acquired a pallor he described as like that of cave-dwelling creatures, untouched by sunlight. What truly defied explanation, however, and what caused Dr. Holbrook to question his own observations for years afterward, was Violet's behavior. Though physically weakened to an extreme degree, she exhibited periods of what he termed unnatural vigor, during which multiple adults were required to restrain her. More unsettling still was her vocalization, not speech in any recognizable sense, but sounds that Dr. Holbrook described as utterly incongruous with human anatomy. Of Edith Gresham there was no immediate sign. Margaret, when questioned, became increasingly agitated, insisting that her elder sister must be found, that she would be at the cottage finishing the preparations. Marshall Everett, leaving Dr. Holbrook to tend to Violet, took several men who had arrived in response to the commotion, and proceeded to the garden cottage at the edge of the property. The approach to the cottage, as described in multiple accounts, required navigating an overgrown path through the recently planted shrubbery, which had grown with surprising rapidity to form an almost impenetrable barrier. The men were forced to cut their way through using tools brought from the main house. The rain had finally subsided, but in its place hung a dense fog that reduced visibility to arm's length and seemed to deaden all sound. What they discovered at the garden cottage was documented in the marshal's official report in deliberately vague terms. Structure found secured from within. Entry forced out of concern for occupants' welfare. Interior showed evidence of recent occupation and activities of an unusual nature. No persons present. A subsequent addendum noted that items of potential evidentiary value were collected and secured, though no inventory of these items was ever filed with the county clerk. More revealing is a letter written by one of the men who accompanied Marshall Everett that night, addressed to his brother living in Kansas City. This correspondence, discovered during a family archive donation to the State Historical Society in 1972, describes the interior of the cottage as having been transformed into a space that defied rational explanation. According to this account, the single-room structure contained an elaborate arrangement of mirrors, positioned to reflect and amplify the light from dozens of candles. The walls were covered with writing, not in standard English, but in what appeared to be a personalized cipher or code, densely packed and apparently executed over many months or even years. At the center of the room stood a table bearing what the letter described as implements of a surgical nature, meticulously arranged and unsettlingly clean amidst the otherwise chaotic environment. Most significant was the discovery of a journal found open on a small writing desk, its final entry apparently interrupted mid-sentence. Though the journal itself was collected by Marshall Everett and never publicly released, the man's letter to his brother indicates that the visible page contained references to the transfer being nearly complete and the vessel finally prepared after months of failure. Of Edith Gresham herself, there was no immediate trace, save for her signature on the final journal entry. A search of the grounds, conducted at first light the following morning, yielded no results. The official record listed her as missing under suspicious circumstances, a designation that would never be resolved. Violet Gresham was indeed transported to the state hospital in St. Joseph, as Dr. Holbrook had recommended. According to admission records, she arrived on September 23, 1891, accompanied by the doctor himself. The intake assessment described her condition as catatonic with periods of extreme agitation and noted physical anomalies suggesting prolonged confinement and malnutrition. Hospital records indicate that Violet was placed in a private room in the institution's east wing with specific instructions for limited contact with other patients and staff. Dr. Holbrook's final note in her file, dated September 24th, expressed his intention to return the following week to consult on her case. However, subsequent entries reveal that this visit never occurred. On the morning of September 30th, an orderly discovered Violet's room empty. Hospital security records indicate that despite a thorough search of the grounds and surrounding area, no trace of her was found. Even more inexplicably, the window to her second-floor room remained locked from the inside, while the door showed no signs of forced entry or exit. The night staff reported no disturbances, with the last check of her room at 2 a.m. showing her apparently asleep in her bed. The only potential clue was a notation in the night nurse's log indicating that at approximately 3:15 a.m., an unusual odor was noted in the East Wing corridor, reminiscent of burnt copper and something organic like overripe fruit. The same nurse reported hearing what she described as a sound like distant humming or chanting, but was unable to locate its source during her rounds. Margaret Gresham, meanwhile, remained in Hamilton, though not at the family home. According to town records, she took up residence at the boarding house on October 1st, occupying a small room on the top floor. The proprietress later recalled that Margaret spoke very little during her stay, spending most days sitting by the window, watching the road leading towards the Gresham property, which remained unoccupied. On October 12th, Margaret visited the office of the town's only lawyer, Mr. Harold Wilson. Though the substance of their meeting was protected by professional confidentiality, land records filed the following day indicate that she signed over the entirety of the Gresham property to the county, with the unusual stipulation that the main house and garden cottage be demolished, the materials removed from the site, and the land left uncultivated for a period of not less than 50 years. Furthermore, a will executed at the same time bequeathed her modest personal savings to establish a fund for the maintenance of this arrangement, with explicit instructions that the property boundaries be marked and preserved, though not in any manner that would encourage visitation or commemoration. These legal documents represent the last official actions of Margaret Gresham in Hamilton. On the morning of October 15th, the proprietress of the boarding house, concerned that Margaret had not appeared for breakfast, checked her room to find it empty. Like her sister Violet, Margaret Gresham had vanished without explanation. Unlike the hospital in St. Joseph, however, the boarding house revealed clear signs of departure. Margaret's few possessions were gone, her bed made with military precision, and on the dresser lay an envelope containing payment for her room through the end of the month. The only other item found in the room was a small leather-bound book tucked beneath the pillow. This volume, currently housed in the special collections of the State Historical Society, appears to be a personal diary begun during the sisters' time in St. Louis and continued through their return to Hamilton. The entries, though sporadic, provide perhaps the only window into the psychological state of the Gresham sisters during this period. The early entries from 1879 and 1880 describe Margaret's life in St. Louis as one of quiet desperation. She writes of Edith's increasing obsession with their father's true legacy, which she claimed went far beyond the physical property and assets left to them. According to Margaret's account, Edith spent countless hours studying certain books from their father's private library, books that had been packed and transported to St. Louis in a locked chest that only Edith could open. Entries from 1885 reference Violet's declining condition and Edith's insistence that conventional medicine could not address what ailed their younger sister. Margaret writes of Edith consulting with individuals she describes only as practitioners of alternative philosophies, and of late-night sessions during which Violet would emerge temporarily improved, but somehow less present. The most telling entries begin in early 1890, when Edith apparently announced that they must return to Hamilton. "E says the work cannot be completed here," Margaret wrote. "The house itself is part of the equation, built according to Father's specifications, with purpose behind every stone and beam. What we've begun in V must be finished where it was meant to occur." The final entry, dated September 20th, 1891, the day before the storm, contains just 3 lines. It will be tonight. E says the alignment is perfect and cannot be missed. B has been prepared. I have played my part, but find I cannot bear to witness the conclusion. May God forgive what we've done in Father's name. Following the disappearance of Margaret Gresham, the county moved swiftly to execute her wishes regarding the property. Demolition of the main house began on November 1st, 1891, overseen by a contractor from Kansas City rather than local workers, none of whom would agree to participate despite the generous compensation offered. The demolition crew reported no unusual findings during the removal of the main house, though the foreman's log notes that the third-floor room was found to have been stripped of all furnishings and fixtures prior to their arrival, in contrast to the rest of the house, which remained fully furnished. The garden cottage, however, yielded an unexpected discovery. According to the contractor's final report, when workers began to dismantle the cottage's stone foundation, they uncovered a small chamber excavated beneath the structure, accessible only through a trapdoor hidden under a built-in cabinet. The space, approximately 6 feet square, contained nothing but a single wooden chair positioned in the center of the dirt floor and, most curiously, a large mirror mounted on the wall directly opposite. The report notes that upon discovery of this chamber, several workers immediately quit, forfeiting their pay rather than continuing. The remaining demolition was completed by December 3rd, with all materials removed from the site as specified. The land was enclosed with a simple postmarker system, unobtrusive but clear in its demarcation of boundaries not to be crossed. For 50 years, as stipulated in Margaret Gresham's bequest, the property remained untouched. Vegetation gradually reclaimed the site, erasing all visible evidence of the structures that once stood there. Locals referred to it simply as the Gresham Lot, and while curious children occasionally ventured near its boundaries, local tradition strongly discouraged any actual trespassing. In 1941, when the 50-year restriction expired, the county commissioners debated the future of the property. Records of these deliberations indicate a strong sentiment toward maintaining its undeveloped status, not out of respect for Margaret Gresham's wishes, but because, as one commissioner put it, some places carry memories best left undisturbed. The land was designated as a nature preserve, ensuring its continued isolation. Throughout these decades, reported sightings of the Gresham sisters persisted across Missouri and neighboring states. A woman matching Edith's description was reported teaching at a small private girls' school in southern Illinois in 1902. A patient resembling Violet was allegedly admitted briefly to a sanitarium near Springfield, Missouri in 1917, though she disappeared before a detailed examination could be conducted. Most numerous were reported encounters with Margaret, whose distinctive appearance made her more readily identifiable. Between 1892 and 1928, no fewer than 13 documented accounts describe interactions with a woman believed to be Margaret Gresham, from locations as distant as Denver, Colorado, and Memphis, Tennessee. The final such report came from a conductor on the Missouri Pacific Railroad, who claimed to have spoken with an elderly woman matching Margaret's description aboard an eastbound train in April 1928. According to his account, filed with the State Historical Society as part of their ongoing collection of Gresham-related materials, the woman identified herself as the last of the Greshams and spoke at length about returning home after the long wandering. When he inquired as to her destination, she reportedly smiled and said, "To finish what was begun. The time of waiting is complete." No passenger matching her description disembarked at any station along the route, according to the conductor's report. The woman simply vanished between scheduled stops, leaving behind only a small leather-bound journal on her seat. This item, forwarded to the Historical Society by the conscientious conductor, was found to contain nothing but blank pages. In October 1941, coinciding almost exactly with the expiration of the 50-year restriction on the property, a curious phenomenon was reported by residents living nearest to the former Gresham land. On 3 consecutive nights, lights were observed moving among the trees that had grown up over the old foundation sites. Lights described as pale blue in color, hovering rather than carried. Local authorities investigated but found no evidence of trespassers. The only unusual discovery noted in the sheriff's report was a series of small excavations in the area where the garden cottage had stood, as if someone had been searching for something beneath the surface. These disturbances were determined to be the work of animals, though several deputies reportedly expressed skepticism about this conclusion. The most substantial development in the Gresham case came in 1968, when construction of a new county road required acquisition of a small portion of the former Gresham property. During preliminary work, excavation equipment uncovered what appeared to be a small metal box approximately 2 feet below the surface in an area that would have been just outside the original boundary of the garden cottage. This container, severely corroded but still intact, was transferred to the County Historical Society for examination. Inside was found a collection of papers, mostly deteriorated beyond legibility, and a small leather-bound book similar to Margaret's diary, but containing what experts identified as the same cipher seen on the walls of the garden cottage in 1891. After extensive efforts by cryptographers from the State University, approximately 30% of the contents were deciphered. The translated fragments tell a disturbing story of Judge Percival Gresham's true interests and activities during his lifetime. According to these writings, the judge had been involved in what he termed experimental philosophy, aimed at achieving something he called the continuation, apparently a method of extending human consciousness beyond its natural lifespan. The deciphered text indicated that Judge Gresham had conducted a series of trials over many years, apparently using individuals whose disappearance would go unremarked upon, transients, indigents, and in at least one case, a domestic servant whose family believed she had simply returned to her home country. These experiments were described in clinical, dispassionate language that made their horrific nature all the more disturbing. Most significantly, the text revealed that the judge believed he had finally achieved success shortly before his death in 1879. The final translated passage reads, "The process is finally understood. The transfer requires 3 elements: the vessel, properly prepared, the conductor, of shared blood, and the anchor, which must remain in place. In my daughters I have all 3. They shall be my legacy and continuation, though only one will understand the gift I have given." Historians and researchers have debated the meaning of this text since its translation, with interpretations ranging from evidence of a previously unknown cult operating in 19th century Missouri to the delusions of a brilliant but deteriorating mind. What cannot be disputed, however, are the subsequent events that unfolded on the Gresham property in the years following the discovery of this document. In 1973, a graduate student in anthropology from the State University received permission to conduct a comprehensive survey of the former Gresham property using newly developed ground-penetrating radar technology. The results of this survey, published in a limited academic circulation, identified several anomalous features beneath the surface, particularly in the area where the garden cottage had stood. County records indicate that a limited archaeological excavation was approved and conducted in June 1974. The team's preliminary report described discovering the intact foundation of the garden cottage, apparently missed during the 1891 demolition. Of particular interest was a network of small tunnels or channels running through the foundation itself, described in the report as unlike any normal construction technique of the period, appearing to serve no structural purpose. The excavation was abruptly halted on the third day when one of the graduate students assisting with the project was found unconscious beside an exposed section of the foundation. The young man, whose name was redacted from official records at his family's request, remained in a comatose state for 11 days. Upon regaining consciousness, he reportedly had no memory of the incident or the preceding week, though hospital staff noted that during his unconscious state, he repeatedly muttered what sounded like, "She's still waiting," and "the anchor holds." The academic supervisor overseeing the excavation, Dr. Lawrence Merrill, requested the project be terminated, citing unpredictable ground stability issues. However, his private correspondence with the university chancellor, later donated to the Historical Society by his widow, expressed far greater concerns. Something about this site defies rational explanation. The configuration of the foundation elements suggests a purpose beyond anything in conventional architectural practice. More disturbing still is the soil composition immediately surrounding these features. Analysis indicates organic compounds inconsistent with normal decomposition processes, as if the earth itself had been altered by whatever occurred there. Following this incident, the county commissioners ordered the excavation filled and the site returned to its natural state. A motion was passed prohibiting any future disturbance of the property without full board approval that has never since been granted, despite numerous applications from academic and private research organizations. In the years since, the former Gresham property has remained officially undeveloped, though local conservation officers report occasional evidence of trespassing, particularly around the anniversary of the sisters' return to Hamilton in September 1890. These intrusions typically leave little trace beyond disturbed vegetation, and, on several occasions, small objects, coins, personal items, written notes, placed precisely where the garden cottage once stood. Perhaps most intriguing are the reports compiled by the County Historical Society regarding individuals who claim to have encountered one or more of the Gresham sisters long after their disappearances. These accounts, collected from 1941 to the present, describe women matching their descriptions appearing briefly to travelers on the road passing near the former property, particularly during storms or unusual atmospheric conditions. A common element in these stories is that the women never speak directly to the witnesses, but appear to be searching for something or someone. Several accounts describe the women walking in a triangular pattern, maintaining precise distances from one another before vanishing as suddenly as they appeared. In each case, witnesses report experiencing a profound sense of unease, followed by what several described as a weight that follows you home. The most recent documented incident occurred in the autumn of 1899, when a surveying team working on a land assessment near the former property boundary reported finding a peculiar arrangement of 3 chairs placed in a triangle on the approximate site of the Gresham House foundation. According to their report filed with the county office, the chairs were antiques consistent with late 19th century furniture, despite appearing in good condition after exposure to the elements. Most unusually, each chair contained a small personal item, a hairbrush with long, dark strands still entangled in its bristles, a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles with one cracked lens, and a leather-bound journal identical to those previously associated with the Gresham sisters, though this one contained only a single written line on its first page. The cycle completes. When the survey team returned the following day with county officials, the chairs and all items had vanished. A thorough search of the area yielded no trace of them, though several team members reported a lingering scent in the air that one described as like burnt copper and overripe fruit. The same peculiar odor noted by the night nurse at the state hospital in St. Joseph over a century earlier. What truly happened to the Gresham sisters and the nature of the inheritance that apparently bound them to their father's mysterious work remains one of Missouri's most enduring historical enigmas. The conventional explanation, offered by skeptical historians, suggests that Edith Gresham subjected her younger sisters to psychological manipulation and possible imprisonment as a result of her own deteriorating mental state, perhaps influenced by esoteric philosophical texts found in her father's library. Yet this rational explanation fails to account for the numerous documented anomalies surrounding the case. The disappearances that defied logical explanation, the consistent reports of encounters long after the sisters should have been deceased, the physical evidence found at the property that contradicted normal architectural and agricultural practices of the period. For those who have studied the case most closely, a disturbing possibility emerges that Judge Percival Gresham, through means that 19th century science was unprepared to comprehend, discovered something about human consciousness that violated natural law. That in his daughters he found the means to extend his own existence beyond death, creating a legacy that transcended normal human limitations, but at a cost too terrible to contemplate. The decoded fragments of his ciphered writings hint at this possibility in their reference to the vessel, the conductor, and the anchor, roles that some researchers believe were forced upon Violet, Margaret, and Edith, respectively. If this interpretation is correct, then the events of September 1891 may represent not the end of the Gresham story, but merely a transition to something beyond conventional understanding. County land records indicate that the Gresham property remains under protected status with no development permitted. Visitors to the area occasionally report unusual atmospheric effects near the old property boundaries, a heaviness to the air, distortions in sound transmission, and the sensation of being observed from multiple directions simultaneously. Wildlife avoids the location, creating an unnatural clearing in the otherwise densely wooded area. Most telling perhaps is the fact that despite the passage of time, vegetation grows strangely across the former foundation sites. Aerial photography conducted in 1898 revealed a pattern visible only from above, areas of stunted growth forming what appears to be three interconnected triangles centered on the locations where the main house, carriage house, and garden cottage once stood. Botanical experts consulted on this phenomenon could offer no scientific explanation. As one researcher noted in his report, it is as if the very soil remembers what occurred there and continues to manifest a pattern established over a century ago, a pattern that, viewed from the correct perspective, bears a striking resemblance to the geometric diagrams found among Judge Gresham's papers. For those few individuals who have dedicated years to studying this case, the conclusion is both inescapable and disturbing. Whatever began with Judge Gresham's experiments continued through his daughters and was formalized in the events of 1891 has never truly ended. The inheritance they accepted or had forced upon them created a connection that transcends conventional understanding of life, death, and the boundaries between generations. Local residents have long observed that unusually severe storms seem to gather over the former Gresham property, particularly in September. During these atmospheric disturbances, Some claim to have seen 3 female figures moving among the trees, maintaining precise distances from one another, engaged in what appears to be an endless search, or perhaps, as some have suggested, an eternal vigil. As one elderly resident of Hamilton stated in an oral history recorded in 1896, "Some inheritances can't be refused once they're accepted. The Gresham girls found that out too late. What their father left them wasn't property or money. It was a burden that would never let them rest, not in this life or whatever might come after." The final word on the Gresham case may belong to Margaret, whose diary entries provide the only first-person perspective on these events. Her last written words, penned the night before the storm that would change everything, seem both a warning and a lament. May God forgive what we've done in Father's name. Whether forgiveness was ever granted, or whether the Gresham sisters continue their triangular procession across that troubled ground, bound by an inheritance they can neither escape nor fully comprehend, remains a mystery that Hamilton, Missouri, has learned to live with, but never truly forget. For those who find themselves traveling the rural roads of Caldwell County on stormy nights, locals still offer the same advice. Drive quickly past the old Gresham property, keep your eyes on the road ahead, and whatever you might think you see among the trees, never stop to offer assistance. Some inheritances, once accepted, can be passed to anyone who shows too much interest or compassion. The legacy of the Gresham sisters serves as a grim reminder that some pacts, once made, cannot be broken by time or distance or even death itself. Their story continues to echo through the years, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing knowledge beyond natural boundaries and the terrible price of an inheritance that should never have been accepted.